You guys should have gotten that notice. Welcome. This is Talk About It Tuesday, and I'm Michaela L. Carson. I'm an author, and I run the Deeper Growth Author Group on Facebook. So Carrie and I have connected through social media primarily, and I'm really excited to have Carrie Turner with us today for this discussion. She's an author and editor, and I think she's going to bring some really interesting insights into the editing process as an author. Sometimes, we don't always have that dual role. So I'm grateful for her being here. Carrie, you want to just say hi real quick?
Yeah, hey. I'm an author, editor, and book coach, and I'm really excited to have connected with Michaela. She's just been such a sweet, bright spot in one of the groups that I admin, and she's just been a pleasure to get to know. So thanks for having me on, Michaela. I'm really excited about today.
I'm excited for your insights. So if you're watching live and you have any questions, you can drop those in the comments. If you're on the replay, feel free to put them in the comments on the social media side, and we'll go through and try to answer those over the next couple of days as well. The theme in our group this month is consistency. And if you've lived life at all, we know that consistency can be challenging, especially depending on the different seasons that we're in. When you have toddlers at home versus working full time and a lot of different things like that. So, Carrie, what are some tips for writing consistency that have worked for you over the seasons?
Yeah, one thing I do, and one thing I always encourage clients to do, is to build sort of a writer's haven when you go in to write. Um, and it's so interesting because our brains, like, even as adults, we can create new neural pathways, and it's like a stream that all of our happy brain chemicals can flow down. And the way we do that, what you're saying, it's consistency. And so what I encourage my writers to do is to pick the same time each day, and to make it a really pleasant environment. When I write, I usually do it at night when everyone's asleep, because I'm a mom, right? And a business owner. And so at like 10 o'clock at night, I kiss my husband goodnight. My baby's been in bed for a couple hours, and I turn down the lights. I tell our digital servant, Alexa, whose name I'm hesitant to say because she'll trigger. I tell her to play my writing playlist, which I've kind of cultivated over time. Um, and then I like light a couple candles. And it's so funny. Our brains are so smart, because I've done it enough times that when I hear the music playing, and it's like instrumental, not really show tunes. Usually it's like instrumental songs from movies like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter.
Okay.
And it just makes me get real inspired. So when I hear those sounds, and I notice that the room's dim, and I smell the eucalyptus candle, something triggers in my brain. And even if I didn't feel like writing, my brain goes, oh, I know what she's doing. She only lights this candle, and she only plays this playlist when it's time to get to work. And so I make sure that it's around the same time, and I make sure that it's pleasant. And the reason for that is, the more we do that, the more it literally creates a groove in our brain, where when we see those triggers, our brain goes, oh, I understand the assignment, you know?
I love that so much, because I think a lot of times when we view our writing, we view it as separate from the rest of the stuff. So
Yeah.
like one of the things I know when I work with clients, we talk about what's working for you in
Mhm.
other areas of your life. So let's bring that into writing. And that's so true. Like in my home, our bedroom doesn't have a TV in it. Bedrooms are for sleeping. And so we've built
Mhm.
this environment of, when we go
Yeah.
into the bedroom and go to sleep, my brain knows it's time to stop. And so I love that, taking that idea of what we know in the everyday and applying it to the writing life.
Yeah.
If you're really organized, then you probably want to be organized in your writing, because that's a skill and a gift that you have that your brain is already used to using. So how do we bridge that from the everyday into our writing life? I love that so
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
I know for me, one of the things I think is really important with consistency is being realistic.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people equate consistency with ideal.
Yeah.
And in my ideal world, this is what it looks like,
Yeah.
but that's not how you build consistency. you start with consistency with the realistic to get to the
Mm-hmm.
ideal. And so what's realistic for me right now in this season? And for me, that was always like, when I started writing my first book my first published book, I had to like write a sentence a day. That was my goal, because
Yep.
realistically, that's all I felt capable of doing at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now for book two, I'm writing a lot more. I'm writing, for a time limit rather than a sentence. Or so,
Mm-hmm.
I think being realistic really helps with bridging the gap from reality to ideal when we
Yeah.
look at it that way.
Yeah. It's so true. And whenever I have a client, one of the first things I tell them, if it's not editing, if it's coaching, is I try to tell them, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set a 10-minute goal for writing each day. And it may not be that you're writing new content. It might be that you're reading what you have. It might be that you're making notes. You might be typing, or you might even be speaking into your phone and dictating, oh, I have this idea. And so I think it's important that we're realistic in the way we give ourselves grace and set
Mhm.
ourselves up to win. Is it crucial that you spend an hour creating new content each day? Not really. What's important is that you set a pattern of being with your WIP, your work in
Yes.
progress. And that can look different for everyone in different seasons of life. But I really think that that repetition and, like you said, that realistic expectation sets us up to win. And then after we're doing 10 minutes a day, we can up it to 20, or we can up it to
Yes.
30 or an hour. Not everyone can do an hour a day. Everyone's in different phases of life. Not everyone's writing full time. But I think whatever we can do to add in those mainstays that our brains recognize, after a while, it becomes as normal as brushing your teeth before bed or letting the dog out before you go to work. This is just what I do at 10 p.m. I light my candle, I put on my music, and I create
Exactly.
something, right?
Well,
And
and
so anything we can do to put it in our daily routine, I think helps so much.
I think that's so good. And I think too, I know one of the things that God has taught me over the years and that I try to encourage others with is growth, not perfection.
Yes, that's so
If you
good.
didn't write anything last week and you wrote 10 minutes this week,
Yeah.
nailed it. Like that's
Yeah.
growth. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. No, in my NaNoWriMo coaching group right now, I have this I have friends who the first week were so pumped, and the second week they were like, I mean, I'm still here, but I'm having a hard time pushing forward. And it's okay. Like, going forward is a celebration.
Yes.
And we go through seasons where we feel in the flow and inspired, and when we don't, and both are okay. But when we choose to persevere, we build resiliency and we teach ourselves, oh, I can do it. I did it before. It'll come back again.
Yes, absolutely. Now,
Yeah.
I want to kind of carry this over into editing for a second. We
Yeah.
talked about like how important it is to have like a process and realistic goals.
Yeah.
A lot of writers are not editors.
Yes.
So how important do you think it is to have a process for editing, or to have, rather than trying to do things simultaneously?
Um, well, I think that, and this is not a shameless plug, but I think it's really valuable to have an editor. And the main reason for that is that when you look at your own work long enough, it's very difficult to not miss small things. You
Okay, I'm
become
going to
blind
pause
to
you.
it.
Yeah, I'm going to pause you for 1 second because I don't want
Yeah.
any record of me ever saying don't get a professional editor. 100%. Every author needs a professional editor. I haven't
Yes.
used Carrie, but I am planning to for my next book. Like, you
You're
need an
so
editor.
sweet.
Okay, so I will shamelessly plug. You need an editor. I'm not one, but with that said, there is an author responsibility level of self-editing, I feel like.
Yes. Yeah,
And
there
so
is.
what does
Yeah.
that look like in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, because I go over this with clients all the time, they'll go, oh yeah, I know you're going to edit, but I want to go through it first. I'll say, great, do that. I think it is important to feel good about what you're sending out to your editor. Michaela, you're so right. um, and I think the best way to do that is to self edit after your rough draft, and that's so hard. I remember when I was ghostwriting my first book, it was an 85,000 word book, and I had these really tight deadlines with the publishing company. And I was so stressed and I had a hard time moving forward. And it's because I was constantly going back to the chapter I just finished to self edit instead of pushing forward. And
That's a very
so
good point.
I learned from that. I got through the book. I taught my brain that I can do hard things, I can be resilient. But what I know now that I didn't know then, and what I would tell everyone writing their first book, is don't edit until you're done with the rough draft. I know that's so hard and it feels so counterintuitive. And I also want to say, disclaimer, different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
Don't feel bad if that's what works for you. But what I found that works for me, and what helps any clients that I've had continue to push forward, that forward motion that we were talking about, is if you're not getting stuck. And there's different types of editing, and I think that's one reason people get stuck. There's developmental editing, which is story based. We're second guessing our story. There's line editing, which is all in the flow. How you say it. Did I choose the best words? And then there's copy editing, which is just like grammar perfections, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, sometimes a little bit of developmental editing as you go is just kind of you restructuring where the story's going. Okay, think about where you want it to go, but don't go in and add a million commas and rephrase things, or you'll just get stuck. Because writing and editing really are two different sides of our brain,
That's
right?
exactly what I was going to say when you were
You've
talking about
got
it.
logical and creative.
Right. When you try to bounce between them, your
Yeah,
brain just sort of fritzes out. It's
it
like
does.
it's like working with technology. It just
Does
kind of doesn't
yes.
do what it's supposed to do anymore.
And
So
then if
that's what
you
I was
have,
going to say. Yeah.
yeah, no,
I think too with fiction and nonfiction, it's a little different.
yeah,
In my experience. So I write fiction for fun, but I publish
yeah,
nonfiction. And so I find when I'm writing fiction, I really don't do a lot of editing. Like you said, do the draft, get it out there, and
yeah.
then before it goes out to peer reviewers or your editor, whoever, that's where you're going to do the kind of the fine tuning part. But on nonfiction,
Mhm.
because a lot of the way I write my chapters stand alone, so I
Yeah,
can write a few chapters and then need a break from writing and go back and
yeah,
edit other chapters because it's not a my books don't tell a whole story from start to finish.
yeah,
So it is interesting, like you said, it depends on what your writing process looks like because,
yeah, it does. Well, and what you're saying about nonfiction makes so much sense. If the chapters are standalone, then yeah, once you've told that story,
that's your
then you
draft.
can self. Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I think that where I've seen people struggle is when they've told part of the story, whether that's a chapter or a book, and then they go back to fix it before they're done telling the story. That can feel very counterintuitive to our brains, and that's when we get really confused. So yeah, I would agree with that caveat. If you're doing short story, if you're doing nonfiction where each chapter is a standalone, that would be the difference,
Yeah, that
right?
makes sense.
Because
Yeah.
you've told the story, so then it's ready. But I think that because we do have that creative and logical, sides of the brain, that getting whatever the story is, whatever the length of that story is, getting it fleshed out before you fix it helps so much.
I agree. And I think because it's two different sides of my brain and I function more in the logical than the creative, I actually
Yeah.
like editing. I'm weird that way. I'm not an editor. Like I wouldn't edit someone else's work.
Mhm.
But I do offer like reviews and things like that where I'm giving
Yeah.
feedback, probably more like line editing in a way, but
Yeah.
not formal. Um so I think it's interesting that um you know, for me, I like editing and so I want to do that. And
Mhm.
sometimes I'll use it as a reward for myself for doing the writing. And I think other people I've seen do the opposite. Like they hate the editing part. So
Yes.
they reward themselves with a writing block when they're done
Yes.
editing so they can get all the things
Yes.
out. And I just think it's
Yes.
funny how God wired us all so differently.
I totally get that. And editing is logical. I really love it. I will say, in all honesty, my favorite editing is developmental editing because it's story focused. I am such a creative. So because I've studied all the commas and grammar, I can do that. I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to let you pay me to polish your work. But my favorite, my heart, is the developmental editing because it's all story. It feels like playing, right?
Yes.
It's like, oh, there's that plot point, there's that character arc, oh, the fruition of the story. So, but selfishly for myself too, I'm like, is it developmental editing? Yes. It's just so much fun. And it's okay to reward yourself with those steps. I would say if it's your own work, make sure that you tell that story before you edit it
Yes.
so that your brain doesn't, you know, fall off the tracks. It's like if
Trotwire.
you're driving it, well, like it's like if you're on, people don't usually take trains anymore, but if you've ever seen a train change tracks while they're moving, it's impossible. They have to pause and switch over unless they're well, if you're at a train station. If you're on a track and it's on a long trek, it can turn, but it has to slow down, it has to regroup. And so our brains are that way too. It's really hard to jump back and forth. We've got to kind of pause and figure out where we're going.
I think some of that comes from the fallacy that we can multitask, because
Yeah,
it's not true.
multitasking isn't really a thing.
It's not a thing. It just
It's not.
interrupts and distracts. I'm a huge fan of time blocking and creativity blocking and all of that, because trying to do all the things at once,
Isn't real.
it's not effective.
Did you see
It's
the
just
TED
not.
talk about that?
What's that?
Did you see the TED talk about
No, I
that?
haven't.
There's an amazing TED talk, and that's where I learned it, that it was saying there's no such thing as multitasking.
It's not.
Your brain can only hold this much. And we try to pump ourselves up and go, not me, I can hold more. And it's like, no, you can't. That's not the way brains work. What happens
You
is
can't
when we're
defy science.
multitasking, is that our brain pauses and pivots. And
Yeah.
we just focus on that. Then we pause and we pivot, but it's just distractions that are well managed. We're not really doing it all at
No.
once.
And it's causing a
Um,
lot of exhaustion to our our mental state of mind, because
yeah,
we're constantly asking our brain to slow down and switch, slow down and switch, slow down and switch, instead of getting into a groove. Now, of course, there are seasons in life where that's just, you've got 5 kids at home and they're all under the age of 6, and your brain's going to have to do that, because what all I can tell you is if that's you, it will get better. They grow up, and there is a season where that ends. So be
yes.
encouraged and have hope. um, I
Or
want to
right
talk.
at 10 o'clock at night, which is totally my vibe.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Well, I wanted to ask you about one thing that, and I have pretty strong feelings on this, but I'm not a professional editor. You are. So this is my question to you. Um, I'm in a lot of writing groups on social media and things like that. And, people are very quick to talk about how, oh, they edited, they used Grammarly. Oh, they edited, they used spell check. So what part, because I believe those things have a part in our writing. What part do you feel Grammarly, Hemingway, Writing Pro Aid, similar apps
Yeah.
have in the process for editing and revising as an author?
I think they're actually really helpful as tools. And as long as we treat them as tools and not as instructors, right? So if my husband is fixing a pipe under our sink, he's going to use the wrench or the tools that he needs. I know nothing about plumbing, so it might not even be a wrench that you use. Don't take my word for it. Not a plumber. But he's not going to just like do it with his bare hands just to prove that he can. And I think that Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly and even spell check are like that. I really like Pro Writing Aid. I think it's the best of those options, and they don't pay me. They don't sponsor me. I've just found them to be the most helpful and the most professional. But what all of those things do is they give you an AI tool to help you check things. It's more like raising a flag and going, oh, hey, did you catch this? Oh, hey, did you catch that? And so I will, I will use it as a guidepost to make sure I didn't miss stuff.
Mhm.
But I don't just automatically approve everything. And I don't assume that because I've gone through that, my job's done. Right.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes where those things can fall short, and where if we treat them like a crutch instead of a useful tool, then it can really mess up what would be good work.
Well,
I've seen a lot of times where Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid will suggest something that isn't needed, or that would only be applicable in MLA or APA, but not Chicago Manual of Style. So you also have to take into account the style sheet you're
So
using.
that's interesting. I was going to bring that up, the style guides, because
Mhm.
when I was writing my first book, I had the Grammarly Pro. I was a
Yeah.
little rusty in formal English, and I did some research, and Grammarly doesn't use APA, MLA, or Chicago. Grammarly
Right.
uses Grammarly. They have their own rule book.
They do.
So I was like blown away. Now I was almost at publishing when I realized this. And I'm like, thank God for my editor, because my publisher wanted Chicago, and I'm like, okay, that's what I need to do. And so that's when I started researching what Grammarly used. And I was like, they don't even use any of those. They use their own format. So
Yes.
know your tool. Know if you've got the Walmart wrench or the,
Yeah.
Home Depot wrench, like what brand you're using too, because
Yeah.
I had no clue that Grammarly didn't use the actual
Mhm.
style guides that writing uses.
And with Pro Writing Aid, you can set it to Chicago Manual of
Nice.
Style. Shameless plug for CMOS. I only edit that way. So,
Yes.
like, I tell everyone, hey, the style guide I use is CMOS, and here's why. The majority of modern publishing novels use that. So, it's kind of become unofficially the standard.
Yes, I agree. I use CMOS, with the exception of I will use the Christian Writer Style Guide for
Mhm.
capitalization for biblical terms and things like that.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
because
Yeah,
I
there's
don't feel like some
nuances.
of but
Yeah, there's
those are my
nuances.
two right there.
Yeah,
I agree
yeah.
with you completely. Um, one of the things I do like as far as the apps go, I do like Hemingway. I haven't used Pro Writing Aid yet, but I'm going to after this call. But one of the things I liked about Hemingway was it actually does a little bit more than just grammar. It
Mhm.
gives you some tone and feel for, not like, I mean, Grammarly does like this is an encouraging thing or this is an informational, but
Right.
Hemingway actually says, this sentence is pretty long and it makes it confusing. Or, and you're
Yeah,
like, oh yeah, it is kind of a run on times
it
four.
is, isn't it?
So I probably could fix
Yeah,
that.
and that would be a line editing,
Yeah.
uh, like tonal issue, right? Um, so in reality too, and this is just a nitpicky thing that I have to mention because I'm
Okay.
an obnoxious, fully meticulous editor, is that sometimes run-on sentences are okay. When we look at it,
Yes.
I deal with this a lot in line editing. People think all your sentences should just be like there's this ideal sentence size and there's not. Run-on sentences are only a problem if there's too many of them. In reality, if we're looking at a paragraph that's 5 sentences long, we want different kinds of sentences because they paint like different colors on a canvas.
Yes.
Um,
And they
and you don't
layer.
want a painting that's just red or just blue. And sentences flow that way. It sounds more poetic and more prose worthy when you have 2 to 3 word sentences, really long, extrapolating, excited sentences, and then just, oh, yeah, also here's this thing.
Yeah.
So you want really short, really long, and then a bunch in the middle, because otherwise it sounds very robotic. It
I
makes it flow better when there's different sizes of sentences.
Your passion for developmental editing is my passion for line editing.
Yeah.
I love the sentence structure. Like
Mhm.
nothing will make me put a book down faster than noun, verb, predicate, noun, verb, predicate, noun, verb, predicate.
Yeah,
I won't read it. Like
I
it doesn't
know.
engage my mind in a way that makes it interesting. So I love that aspect of building your craft of writing.
I love it
Um,
to make it pretty. Like how
yes,
you say something is just as important, or how you say something is just as important as the story itself.
I agree.
I was
Okay.
watching a TV show the other day, and the premise for it wasn't particularly fascinating. What was amazing was this character development and the way the actors talked and the way they spoke and how they could talk about groceries and you'd be like, tell me more. And so it wasn't about this huge conflict. It's a very minor regular life conflict, but the way they told this story was so poetic that I was in the first 5 minutes. And
Mesmerized.
that's line editing.
Yes. So all the editing is important. I'm not saying that, neither one of us are saying only use one. You need all of them.
Use all of them. Developmental editing is what takes your story from good to great.
Yes.
It's where you make sure there's no plot holes. Everyone has a satisfying character arc. You hit all the beats and save the cat or archetypal plot or whatever you're using. And then line editing is like, what
It
did
takes
it
your
sound
writing from good
lovely?
to great.
Yeah, it does. It's like if developmental editing perfects your story, line editing perfects your prose.
Yes.
And not in a polished way, but in a, is this fun to read? Is it readable? Does it flow well? Do I want to sit there for whatever you're saying because I'm just so tuned in to your voice and your style? Line editing is equally important. Nobody's going to care how good a story is if it's told poorly.
Right.
So, and
And
then
of course, the grammar and spelling and those things matter too, because if
yeah,
it's full of typos, no one's going to read it either.
that's my like least apt. Full disclosure, I will do copy editing. I'm happy to do it. It's just not my more natural forte, but it's important. It is where you look more professional. Do a million commas. I mean, don't really do a million commas, but put them in the right places.
Yes.
So yeah.
Okay, so I did reach out to the group before we had this call, and one of the questions that I got that I thought was very good that I wanted to kind of talk with you about is, and I want to back up for a second to explain the context behind this.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in self-editing. I think it's really important. I think
Mhm.
that, it's not realistic for most first-time authors, especially, to hire an editor multiple times. So like, okay, here's stage one, here's stage two. So how do we grow in self-editing? How do we become better writers? And so I think that's the backstory. So with that said, like I have a friend who writes fiction. So
Yeah.
she does her, like you said, she writes her draft and then she goes through and she works on revisions. And then she reads that and then takes some time away, works on revisions. Some authors may use, peer reviewers, get feedback on that, make revisions.
Yeah.
How many revisions is too many? At what point some point we have to move forward. So what
You
is
know,
your professional thoughts on that?
there's not a number. I will say if there's too many revisions, it means one of two things. It either means that it's your book baby and you're having a real hard time letting go, which is, I think, all of us.
Yeah.
Or it means there's something the story is really lacking and you need to get some good help with that. And I think one way to do that is a peer critique group.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a part of something called the DFW Writers Workshop. It's here in Dallas, Fort Worth. A lot of cities have them. You can bring pages and read for 10 minutes, and you will get some intense but valuable feedback from people who are anywhere from amateurs to published to professional editors. I'm in the group too. I know some authors there who are lovely people who are on the shelves at Barnes and Noble, and they're sitting and they're not on the shelf, their books are on the shelf, but they're sitting in those rooms giving feedback. And so if you want a really good, we might need to mute Bobby, it says he's trying to connect to audio.
Oh,
If you want a really good critique to find out, like, not just how I feel about releasing my book baby, but what it's really lacking, a professional critique group. And I use the word professional not because you pay them, but because it's other professionals, right? A real critique group
right.
can help you find that out. I
So
do think too many revisions is a red flag. It either means you're having a hard time letting go, or there's some huge holes that you're not seeing.
that's good. I appreciate that. And I will do a shameless plug here because you brought it up. I'm actually launching an online version of a critique type group in January. It's going to be the Consistency and Accountability Club.
Love it.
And it's going to have some weekly coaching, a Facebook group, but the whole purpose of it is to build a network. I have found in my area, those in-person groups are not available or helpful. I know the first one I went to was a bunch of people, you read a poem and everybody clapped and told you, oh, you're beautiful, you're a wonderful writer, and then moving on to the next person.
Oh
That's
no,
not
that's not
helpful.
critique.
I also live in a community or an area with a lot of retirees. And so they're kind of just in a different season of life and they're not necessarily looking to publish or looking to grow a craft. So I'm excited about that. You can, if you're in the deeper author group, I'll have information on there for that and it'll be on my author page as well. But that's coming. I'm going to do a great small business Saturday deal if you're interested. But tell us a little bit, let's wrap up. And I, again, appreciate all your patience in getting the tech stuff worked out. Carrie, thank you. How do people reach you? How do they contact you if they want to
Yeah.
learn more about editing or what your services are?
Thank you for asking. So, a couple ways. I'm on Facebook as Carrie Turner Writing and Editing Services. And the and is a little ampersand, not the word and. So, Carrie Turner Writing and Editing Services. But they can also find me on my website, which is just sort of a portfolio of some of the things I've done. It also has my email and phone number if they want to reach out. My website is carriebturner.com. The B is for Beth, because Carrie Turner wasn't available when I made my website.
I think B
So
is for best, but that's my opinion.
Carrie Best Turner. I don't know how my husband would feel about me being the best Turner, but that'd be funny.
That's
So
fair.
Carrie, it's Carrie, like Carrie Underwood, B and then Turner, like Tina Turner.
Okay.
CarrieBTurner.com.
All right. And once I post this video on the replay, I'll make sure I put those links in the comments as well if you're looking for Carrie,
Lovely.
so you can
Lovely.
connect with her. All right. Thank you so much. This was really fun. And
It's a lot of fun.
I'm grateful for you again for your patience and just being here. And hopefully we'll get to this again next month with someone else. So thank you guys.
Lovely.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, Michaela. Thanks
Bye,
for
Matt.
having me.